The town of Adams, Tennessee is located in Robertson County along the Red River. With a population of 624, you might think this small town was not much to talk about, with nothing much going on there. But for decades, the town has been catching the interest of ghost hunters and paranormal investigators from around the world. What could be so interesting about this small town? Well, it is the site of the infamous Bell Witch haunting. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name's Miranda, and on this channel we like to talk about things that are mysterious and unexplained. And today, as you could tell from the title and the intro, we are going to be talking about the Bell Witch haunting. The legend of the Bell Witch is one of the most popular Appalachian mountain stories. From 1817 to 1821, the Bell family was tormented by an invisible spirit that has come to be known as the Bell Witch. John Bell was born in Edgecombe County, North Carolina. During his early years, he apprenticed as a barrel maker and then later started a career in farming. In 1782, he married Lucy Williams, who was also born in Edgecombe County, and she was born into a family of wealthy planters. In 1790, they had their first child, Jessie Bell, followed by 3 more sons. John Jr. in 1793, Drury in 1796, Zadok in 1803, and then their first daughter named Esther in 1800. Now, I also did come across a few sources that mention a son named Benjamin. However, I could not find really any in-depth information about him, just that was one of their sons. I have also seen where they only had 6 children. However, the main source I used showed 8, so I think there's a little discrepancy in different sources there. But I just wanted to throw that out there for you guys. All was continuing to go well for the Bells until around the year 1801 and the year 1804, when their crops failed in those 2 years and they decided to move west. And this is where the story of the Bell Witch comes into play. In the winter of 1804 to 1805, John Bell purchased some land and a big house and moved his family from North Carolina to a small Red River community in Robertson County, Tennessee. And this would be present-day Adams, Tennessee. He continued to acquire land, and within the next few years, he owned around 328 acres of land. And a lot of this land he used for planting and growing his crops. And around this time, he also became an elder in the Baptist church in that area. Now, John and Lucy went on to have 3 more children after moving to Tennessee. And although the Bell Witch haunting affected all of the children in the family, these 3 children were the ones that the Bell Witch affected the most. So they had Betsy in 1806, Richard in 1811, and Joel in 1813. And by all accounts, the Bells had a happy and successful life in this little Red River community. Then one day in 1817, John Bell was walking around and checking on some of his cornfields when he came across a strange animal. It was a dog, but there was something very unsettling about this dog in particular. It seemed to be misshapen, and it just sat there staring at John and didn't move. Now, this gave John a very eerie feeling, a feeling that he had not really felt in his time in this area. Luckily, he carried his rifle with him and he was able to take a shot at this animal. When he did this, the dog ran off and seemed to vanish. So John went to inspect the area where the dog had been, and he found something very strange. He was surprised to see that there were no paw prints from the animal, and in the area where the dog had been sitting, there was no corn or any foliage that was pressed down to the ground. And this was very unusual and confusing to John, as I think it probably would be most people. Looking back, this is said to be the first documented manifestation of the entity that would go on to haunt the Bell family. That same evening after dinner, they began hearing knocking sounds on the outside of their house. And these sounds would continue each night and become even more forceful as the days went on. John and his sons would even run out to try and catch whoever was making these noises, but they never could catch anybody in the act. Now, John was sure that it had to be someone from town that was playing tricks on them, so he told his family not to mention any of these encounters to anyone. He was hoping that in doing this, they would eventually be able to catch whoever this person was that was making all of these noises. However, the knocking sounds would continue, and every time they went to try and see who was doing it, they never found as much as a footprint outside where the knocking had been. Then one night, some of the Bell children were woken up in the middle of the night with the sound of rats gnawing on their bedpost. But when they climbed out of bed, the noises stopped. But almost as soon as they got back into bed and had fallen back asleep, they were woken up again by the same noises. Now, this time the boys got out of bed to look for the rat, but they never found a rat, and there were no markings on the bedpost where they had thought the rat was gnawing. As the weeks went on, the children would start complaining about their sheets being pulled off and pillows being thrown across the room by something that they couldn't see. As the weeks and months went on, the encounters with this entity would continue and begin to escalate. They began hearing sounds that were like a faint whisper of a woman that was singing what sounded to be hymns. And Betsy Bell, the youngest daughter, began being the target of this entity. It would do things like pull her hair and slap her to the point where there would be whelps and handprints on her body. I mean, can you imagine not just being woken up by that, but just going about your business and all of a sudden your hair gets pulled or you're getting slapped and you can't even see what's doing it? Now, during this time, Betsy was engaged to Joshua Gardner, and it is said that the entity made it known that she did not approve of this engagement. And many believe that that could be the reason why the Bell Witch was targeting Betsy to begin with. And later in 1821, Betsy would end up ending her engagement because of the torture from the Bell Witch. Now, John Bell was usually private about most things, and this was no different. However, once his daughter started being tormented by this entity, he finally decided to confide in his closest friend and neighbor, James Johnston. Johnston was a devout Christian, and many described him as an expert on the Bible. He was skeptical about the stories that John Bell was telling him, and he thought that it was probably just his children playing pranks or making jokes. But he also believed that there were good and bad spirits, just like he read about in the Bible. So he seemed to be a good person for John to confide in, because he was skeptical, but he was also able to keep an open mind and be logical about the situation. However, after spending one night in the Bell's house, he would go from a skeptic to a believer. So Johnson and his wife decided to stay the night in the Bell's house. Everything seemed to be quiet at first until they decided to turn in for the night. And this is when they began having the same experiences that John had described. Their sheets were yanked off, and James was even slapped, just like Betsy always was. At this point, it is said that he jumped out of bed and began addressing the entity. He said, quote, "In the name of the Lord, who are you and what do you want?" End quote. And after he said this, everything seemed to be peaceful again. In the morning, he told the Bells that it must be, quote, "an evil spirit, the kind that the Bible talks about." So after these events, of course, the word of the Bell Witch spread. In 1819, it even reached Major General Andrew Jackson, who had become very interested in the legend of the Bell Witch. 3 of the Bell boys had fought in the Battle of New Orleans under General Jackson. So when Jackson heard about the Bell Witch and all the chaos that she was causing, he decided to pay the family a visit and see for himself. Jackson brought with him several men, a wagon, and some horses. But as the group approached the Bell property, the wagon suddenly came to a stop. It seemed to be stuck in the mud and the horses were unable to pull it out. After several minutes of having the horses try to pull the wagon out, Jackson said it must be the Bell Witch. And once he said this, they began hearing a disembodied female voice. The voice told Jackson that they could continue on and that she would be seeing them again later. The group continued up to the Bell home and they set up tents on the Bell property. Now, the first few hours of the night were pretty uneventful, but one of Jackson's men was a little cocky and described himself as a witch tamer. Now, it's important to remember that the Salem witch trials were only about 100 years prior to the Bell Witch haunting, and there was still a lot of paranoia around anything that couldn't be explained. So this witch tamer was bored after the hours of no activity, and he pulled out a pistol saying that its silver bullet could kill any evil spirit. He also said that the Bell Witch was afraid of his silver bullet, and that's why she had not done anything to them and would not do anything to them. Which, I mean, in my opinion, you're just asking for trouble at that point. He immediately began screaming and complaining of being stuck with pins and being beaten. The man was then kicked out of the door by the invisible entity. The entity was angry and stated that she would be revealing another fraud in Jackson's group the next evening. Of course, now the men are terrified and they are begging to leave the property, but Jackson wants to stay so that he can figure out who this fraud in his group is. And at this point, the men go to their tents to sleep for the night. Not much is known from this point on, but Jackson and his men were seen the next morning heading back to Nashville. Some claim that Jackson later stated that he would rather fight the British than fight the Bell Witch. Now, the entity continued to show disdain for John Bell and even vowed that she would eventually kill him. For almost a year, John's health had been declining. He had been experiencing twitching in his face and trouble swallowing, and this sickness just continued to get worse. By the fall of 1820, he was confined to his home due to his declining health, and the entity ramped up her treatment of him. She would do things like remove his shoes while he was trying to walk. She would slap his face after he was recovering from one of his seizures that he would have, and she would also continually curse at him. The Bell Witch just was so brutal to John Bell specifically and Betsy, but really the whole Bell family. And a lot of the cursing could actually be heard from all over the farm. On December 19th, 1820, John Bell slipped into a coma, and the next day he ended up passing away. Now, after his death, the family found a strange vial in the cabinet that had a weird black liquid inside. No one had remembered ever seeing this liquid before or seeing it inside the cabinet. The doctor told them that they needed to test this liquid out on one of the farm animals so that they would know what this liquid does. So one of the sons went outside, found a stray cat, and forced it to drink a little bit of the black liquid. And almost instantly, the cat fell over dead from just a few drops of this. And it is said that after they found out what the black liquid does, the Bell Witch made it known that she was the reason that John Bell was dead. But since the passing of John Bell, the presence of the Bell Witch has been pretty much non-existent. There were reports that she came back and visited the family on a few occasions, but other than that, it's been pretty quiet around there. Some people have seen strange lights coming from the property, and others have also said that they've heard a strange voice singing from near the property as well. John's wife Lucy stayed in the house until she passed away in 1838. Today, there's nothing left of the Bell household, but there is a cave on the property. And most people believe that the entity that tormented the Bell family probably came from this cave. And a lot of the paranormal investigators that come to investigate the property, that is one of the places where they go and sometimes find activity there. And that is the story of the Bell family and the Bell Witch haunting. If you made it this far, go ahead and leave a blue heart down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out. And it also helps you to be notified anytime I upload a new video. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.